Welcome to the Single Father Podcast. I am your host, Kendall Doniker. This podcast is dedicated for anyone out there who's dealing with mental health and fatherhood. You'll hear about my struggles, my defeats, my victories, my highs, my lows, my triumphs, my tribulations, and everything in between. I like to call this a collection of journal entries into my struggle and adapting to single fatherhood. Without further ado, let's take a look inside my journal, the Single Father Podcast. One that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. We're going to be talking about sex. And it's it's something that I really wanted to bring up, not only in regards to mental health but I spoke about sex a little bit in regards to how to speak to your children about sex and making that normalized. But I really wanted to expand the topic and just some personal thoughts and questions that I had up in regards to sex and figuring what's healthy, what's not healthy, what's supportive in a relationship and what's not. There are a lot of questions in regards to sex, and it's sometimes can be an uncomfortable topic, but I think diving deep and kind of understanding where kind of normalizing some of these things is definitely beneficial. So I'm speaking to Dr. Kate on this, and who is a sex therapist and a psychologist as well, and she's a very busy woman, and she spoke to me today, and I'm really grateful. I mean, it's a great episode, and she told me I ask good questions, and I'm happy about that because my thought is that if I ask good questions, then my listeners will get good answers. And even myself, a lot of these questions I asked her, I was genuinely curious. So I felt like I got a lot of information for myself as well. So this to me was a great episode. I really love this one. And as I wrap up this season of VentPack, a huge thank you to everyone who has been a part of it and was willing to be brave enough and to venting about the topics, whether it's mental health or genuine genuine conversations in regards to life, culture, sex, depression, anxiety, and spreading mental health awareness, which is definitely the goal of mine. And I'm extremely grateful just because this season, especially in doing this podcast, I really felt like I got a lot of information about myself, how to move forward, how to cope with different things, and just a lot of helpful information that I can use in my everyday life. Um, and most of all, just a lot of perspective as well. And I think we could all use a lot of that, just genuine perspective and how to look at things maybe in a different light. Me personally, in my life, I've been exploring new things as well. I have a friend of mine who's um, getting me into a lot of like stones and crystals, and I've been actually. She goes a little far with it. I wouldn't necessarily agree with everything that she says, but she's been getting me into a lot of it, and I've I've I feel like it's been healing my soul, right? Because even if I don't necessarily agree with everything in regards to it, I feel like nonetheless it heals my soul. I have these rings and bracelet and these necklaces and these stones and around me and things like that, and it makes me feel good. I feel the energy come from it, and I feel like a happier person, or at least someone who's better equipped to deal with the everyday life and stresses that we all have. And I think that's really what it's all about. Even if you don't necessarily believe in a lot of those things, I'm not telling you to go out and surround yourself with crystals and gemstones, but I would encourage everyone to explore new ways of making yourself feel good. No sexual pun intended. Just maybe if you don't usually go to the gym, try it. If you don't usually eat healthy, try it. If you don't usually do yoga, try it. If you don't usually surround yourself with stones, crystals, and things of that nature, try it. Oils, essential oils, there's a lot of things out there that is available to us to make us feel good. Um, and just so happens one of those things happen to be sex, which we're going to talk about right now. So, without further ado, let's vent. Perfect. All right. So, I wanted to ask you. So, tell me a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure, sure. So I'm a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist, and I started in this field. This is the second career for me. I used to sell group health insurance and dental plans and all of that, which was a good career, but I really kind of wanted a little bit more soul in the game. So
Mm.
I went back to school, and for a long time, I worked in the prison systems doing assessments and treatment with high risk sex offenders and high risk non sexual offenders to really kind of get a sense of what would be apt for them in terms of reintegration with the community, if that were something that were on their trajectory. So I did that work for a long time. I worked with the courts and did some expert witness testimony and evaluations. Then I really transitioned more into private practice. And in my private practice work, I really specialize on treating trauma and all different kinds of things that are born out of trauma. And so my definition of trauma is very broad, but um, you know, anything that kind of overwhelms us or overwhelms our nervous system to the point that it leaves an indelible mark. And that can really show up in our life in a lot of different ways. It can look like anxiety, depression, it can look like PTSD, it can look like addiction issues, and disordered relationships to food, to money, of course, to sex and porn and love, and sexual dysfunction issues. So, as a certified sex addiction therapist and certified sex therapist, as well as a couples therapist trained in the psychobiological approach for couples therapy, I'm really helping people remediate the long term symptoms of trauma or dysregulation that cause problems
Mm.
for them later in life.
Wow, that's really interesting. Tell me about like in the prison system. Is it? I mean, that has to be very interesting because a lot of these people are, criminal sex offenders and things of that nature. Um, I'm always curious. Is there a is for instance, is based on what you're saying, is there a traumatic reason why people would engage in that sort of criminal activity of maybe sexual assault or something like that? Does that stem from anything specifically?
Well, here's what I'll say about that. There are some studies that demonstrate that there is no trauma that's at the basis of offending behavior, and then there are a lot of studies that demonstrate a lot of correlational activity between early childhood adverse experiences like abuse and neglect and so on, that
Right.
do lead to offending behavior. But what I want to really emphasize is that there are a lot of people in this world who endure abuse and neglect and trauma at an early age who do not grow up to be offenders,
Sure,
right?
of course. Yeah.
But many of the offenders have some trauma in their history. So it's
Mm.
hard to sort of say there's not a connection there.
So it might be just some maybe just mental health snap there that kind of brought someone to do something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then I wanted to ask you about like maybe relationships specifically. So for me, so again, I'm pretty open, so I'll just ask you. So is there a reason in relationships where so for instance, like a guy, right? If I'm engaging in sexual activity with a woman, but for some reason, like my mind says, I am so ready to go. I'm ready, right? But the something else isn't connecting, right? Is there a reason for that?
That's
Because
a good
as a
point.
guy,
Mhm.
yeah, I just feel like that maybe like I've been there. I think lots of guys have been there. Like, I'm ready to go, but your sexual arousal for some reason isn't
Mhm.
up to par.
Yeah, yeah. There are so many reasons that could underlie someone's erection not cooperating with their intentions, right? And
Yeah.
they can include things like anxiety, fatigue, um, perhaps they're too early in their refractory period from their last orgasm, and so they're not able to quite get there in the arousal cycle again. Um, for some men who watch a lot of pornography, it can impact their arousal with women or with partners in real life.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a medication issue, sometimes it's a medical condition issue, sometimes it's an alcohol or other substance related issue. So there can be a whole myriad of reasons. But also, I think it's important to just note that not every sexual experience needs to involve an erection. And sometimes our bodies just have other plans. And it doesn't even mean that something's wrong. It could just mean, hey, I'm not really as into it as I think I am. And that's okay.
That's and I hear a lot about that as well because I feel like pornography tends to be maybe an issue in some relationships. Because I wanted to hear your thoughts because I feel like some people say, well, pornography is healthy in some standards, and there's nothing wrong with engaging in pornography and masturbation and things like that. But then I also hear that it can also be very damaging, especially maybe for men who kind of, I guess, is it that they see a certain perception of porn and it's not in reality, so they get maybe disinterested, or what would you think?
Yeah, those are all really great questions. And I'm actually developing a course right now online for men who are struggling with some kind of problematic relationship to porn and masturbation because it is a really
Oh,
emergent
really?
problem. Yeah. So let me just be really clear on one thing. I am not against visual erotica as a construct. We, as human beings, we are visual creatures, and there is nothing objectively wrong with getting turned on by seeing other people, engage in sexual behavior. What I do think is one of the pitfalls of pornography for people is when it's used too frequently, or the kinds of images that are being viewed are so much different than what's going on in their real life. There's a big disconnect with how the brain gets wired for arousal. So if you're watching porn that's really extreme or really unlikely to be replicated in your day to day life, and then you go into your day to day life and you're like, wow, I really used to like vanilla ice cream. It was awesome. But now it's so
Right.
boring because I've been eating chocolate ice cream with salted caramel and, awesome like sea salt on top. And, it's all kinds of amazing. And then you go back to vanilla and you're like, yeah, it's nice, but kind of miss my sea salt and caramel and
Right.
all of that. So the brain and the body just kind of get different messages about what's going on. And I think that the other variable that can really impact a lot of people if they are excessive with their porn consumption is that you lose the experience of having a two-person experience when you're in the same room with another human. And so when people watch porn really compulsively, basically their body learns how to be aroused without data from another human being in the room. So you don't get that sensory experience of smell, taste, sound, touch, all of that. And so then when you're in the room with a real life partner, it can sometimes be distracting, or it can um, combat arousal, or it can create a lot of anxiety because now all of a sudden you're with a real person. There's all this feedback coming at you, and you're like, I just want to watch the screen. That's a one directional
Right.
experience. And so I think there's just a lot of different implications on the brain. And with most of the porn consumption these days being digital, it influences our brain in a very different way than sort of print media.
Is there a connection between maybe that specifically and maybe sexual assault? Because it's just in my head, I'm thinking, is there like a sense where maybe a guy isn't experiencing those same, extracurricular activities that he sees in pornography, and maybe he transcribes that within sexual assault if they have like some sort of mental health issue, if that makes sense.
I'm not quite sure I understand what you're asking.
Like for instance, like if someone who is watching pornography and they see really like maybe like hardcore porn or something like that, and they're not really getting that in real life, would that be a reason why someone might engage in maybe something like sexual assault, if that
It
makes sense?
abs- yeah, it could be. So again, there's nothing wrong with visual erotica, but when we look at mainstream pornography and the ways in which porn is consumed, there are a lot of really extreme and violent and aggressive scenes that when we think about it kind of as a concept and as a fantasy, there's nothing objectively wrong necessarily with that. That's kind of the
Mhm.
benefit of pornography. It allows you to explore different fantasies and different ideas. But if that's someone's arousal template and it's really sort of the only thing that they are indulging in terms of arousal, it can there's a couple of things that can happen. One, seeing it so frequently and so readily can provide messages that that's in fact what women, for example, want. And
Mm.
it can misconstrue expectations about what sex can actually be like. So if someone doesn't have a lot of other data, other experiences, and that's their only source of information about sex, they
Right.
might not really understand the concepts of mutuality and consent in the same way. So there's that. But certainly, if someone's not able to get aroused with a consensual situation that doesn't mirror what they're seeing in non-consensual fantasy porn, it might, increase the likelihood that they would start to push that boundary.
Mm. Interesting. And can the same happen with women as well? Not necessarily the sexual assault issue, but can women, because obviously thinking from a male's point of view, but can women get disinterested with one-on-one in porn or sex because they look at porn too much?
Sure. Sometimes the studies aren't as conclusive with women. There certainly are a lot of women who do struggle with compulsive porn use, but the data is much less rich with that
Hmm.
population than it is with men. But of the women that I've worked with, certainly they can become desensitized to different kinds of sexuality, or excuse me, sexual experiences in real life.
And in regards to that, would you say that specifically within a relationship, is masturbation a healthy form of like exploring your own sexuality? Like, would you say maybe too much masturbation is unhealthy for someone? I'm just curious on like what you think, because some people say, well, if you masturbate too much, then that's not healthy, and then I hear a contradictory statement. So I'm curious what you think.
Well, I think it's important first to define too much. And that's difficult to do because the answer is subjective for every person. And,
Sure.
one person's once a day might feel fine. Another person that might feel like it's too much. And for someone else, it might feel like it's not enough. So we have to be really mindful that every single person's body is different and their relationship to arousal and to sexual stimulation is different. People have, different refractory periods to keep in mind. So there's no cookie cutter answer for how much porn is acceptable or masturbation is acceptable, whether you're in a relationship or not. But some of the things that I would think about are are you keeping it a secret from your partner? Because if it's a secret, then it's probably a problem in
Mm.
some way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's because your partner doesn't like porn or it gets in the way of you being sexual with your partner, I might consider that an issue. But for a lot of couples, they're fine masturbating on their own, and it can be a really healthy source of sexual exploration, self care time, self nurturing time, and they bring that zazazoo back to their partner, and it allows their sexual chemistry to be even stronger because they do value a sex positive relationship to self pleasure and partner pleasure. So again, it's not a problem if it's not a problem for the couple.
Sure. And what would you say about maybe there's people out there who are sex addicts, right?
Mhm.
And there's even groups for people who just have a problem with thinking about sex too much. What would you say? I want to hear your opinion on something like that, because I just got out of college where pretty much everybody thinks about sex, but you don't think, hey, I don't think any of these people have a problem. But I guess, when does it become a problem? And do you even think it's a problem at all?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And there's no formal diagnosis for sex addiction in the United States glossary of mental health conditions, the DSM-5. But internationally, certainly there is recognition for compulsive sexual behaviors disorder, and that's sort of the overarching umbrella that we consider porn addiction, sex addiction to live under. So to answer your question, again, everyone's relationship to sexuality is different. And so we really can't say if someone crosses over this threshold, then there's a problem in terms of the frequency that they're having sex, thinking about it, so on and so forth. But things to consider are, does the preoccupation with sex or the preparing to be sexual or the actual sexual behavior result in any issues in any other domain in your life? So, is it getting in the way of you being able to be productive at work? Is it causing you to contract sexually transmitted infections that you're not aware of? Is it causing other medical issues or injuries? Uh, is it impacting your primary relationship because it's resulting in extra relational sexual activity? Um, are you exposing your children to any pornography because you're careless and you're leaving it open on devices? There are lots of things like that to think about. I've worked with a lot of people whose sexual behavior escalates to the point that they are exhibiting in public or masturbating in their car. And those are arrestable offenses. So when people's sexual behavior starts to leave really a damaging wake for them in their lives, and they're not able to stop at that point, then I would say there might be an issue with compulsivity. So some other indicators to look for are things like, um, do you experience any withdrawal symptoms? Now, people think about withdrawal from, for example, an opioid being very obvious. People get sick, they have fever, chills, maybe they're vomiting, they're nauseous for several days. We can have withdrawals from behavioral addictions as well, and they tend to be more emotional. So people
Mhm.
will experience a lot of mood lability or mood changes. They might be more irritable than they typically are. Um, and really sort of the obsessional preoccupation is strong. So I would say if those things exist or you experience tolerance, needing more and more of it, or more extreme examples of sexual activity, then yeah, you might want to reevaluate if there's some compulsivity at play.
If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has the tools to allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything you need in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Oh wow, I never even thought of it that way. Yeah, it's very interesting. Why do you think there's such a sexist view on so again speaking from a verse of a college point of view.
Okay.
So if a guy were to sleep with like a lot of women, he is kind of praised for it. But if a woman engages in a lot of sexual partners, it's more of a derogatory point of view.
Yes.
And within speaking with a lot of women, and yeah, I think it's a very sexist kind of point of view. And I wanted to hear your view on that. Why do you think we have come to that sort of conclusion about men versus women and how many people we're allowed to sleep with, in a sense?
Yeah, it's such a great question because there absolutely remains a double standard about sexual behavior when it comes to cisgender men and cisgender women. Um, there are a lot of variables that I think contribute to this double standard. One is definitely a patriarchal and a sexist mindset that has been passed down generation to generation from generation, and it's made up of a lot of different kind of social variables. I think there are a lot of very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of early human existence, religion based attitudes about gender that were born really out of a lack of sophistication and understanding gender and the human species and sort of the biology of how we work. So human beings were so innovative in our survival strategies. When we don't have answers for something, we make it up.
Right.
And oftentimes in very early civilization, that took the form of religion. It took the form of kind of folklore and fantasy. And those stories became ingrained as understanding. And over time, unfortunately, they didn't really get challenged until we became more sophisticated as cultures and the educational, academic, and philosophical um, experiences of humans really blossomed more in more recent centuries. So I think we have a long history of sort of misunderstanding about the differences between men and women that are overcoupled with religious ideology and certainly political and power based ideology. So, all of those things kind of coupled together have created this very bifurcated understanding of who's allowed to be sexual and enjoy it and who's not. But luckily, as we are, kind of bumping up against the pressure cooker of that ideology, we have more factions of people who are celebrating sex positivity. And my hope is that that continues because when we liberate women from all of that shame sexually, men's lives get better too.
Right.
And I think that's sort of the fear is that what happens if women enjoy themselves sexually? And what does that mean for how they operate in heteronormative relationships with men? And what does that mean for the men? So there's just a lot of fear, I think, that gets in the way of that. But when women are free to be sexual, oh my God, everybody's so much happier.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think it's bad for men at all. uh, so last couple questions here, and I wanted to, it's just getting your opinion because I generally am curious. I have much respect for you. So I wanted to hear your thoughts. I read this study recently that argued the positivity of open relationships. Um, and that as well is a very taboo thing, right? And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. And do you think that can work or be healthy or is effective?
Such a great question. Again, it kind of comes back to every single human being on the planet is their own person. And so there are some people for whom an open relationship absolutely won't work. It kicks up fears of abandonment, it kicks up a lot of jealousy that is difficult for them to manage, or they don't know how to have effective conversations about boundaries and debriefing and or they might feel like they don't have volition. And so opening up a relationship feels really unsafe, or it simply just goes against their preferences and their values. So I would say for those people, open relationships are a disaster, right? But there are a lot of other people who really work hard to perfect the art of their evolving boundary system in whatever their primary relationship is. And they do a nice job of getting their needs met from others and really preserving the primary coupleship. And so, it might not work for everyone and it might not be ideal for those people. And then for others, the idea of monogamy feels suffocating, it feels oppressive, it feels unattainable, or they simply don't trust that they'll be able to find that partner in their lives. And so, I think there are a lot of motivations that go into people choosing one lifestyle or another. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. Right. But
Yeah,
if it does, talk to a sex therapist, talk to somebody who's done it successfully, and definitely be proactive and intentional in how you organize it, because that can be sort of the setup for success or failure if you don't do it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I speaking of like openness, immediately when I was like preparing to speak to you, I just thought of all the questions I'd ask you, but for some reason I kept on thinking of 50 Shades of Grey, right? I wanted to ask you your opinion because in that I think there are even some conversations that I've had personally. There are some people who like to have a dominant relationship and a submissive relationship.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask you your opinion. Are those things healthy? Because it goes back to the kind of our beginning of the conversation. My fear would be um, maybe a man takes that too far and thinking that I'm the dominant person.
Right.
And then I think of maybe a submissive person and I think of, is that bad for your self-esteem? I think of so many questions when I think of something like that. I wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, such good questions. Well, first I would say that the book and the movie 50 Shades of Grey, in my opinion, does not depict the ideal BDSM relationship because it's not always consensual in that movie, and that is in direct opposition with healthy kink. So for people who want to dabble in power dynamics with their relationship, really there are a couple of key things to consider. You can get very extreme in the dominant submissive roles, and it can be very healthy if everything is consensual. There's healthy communication and boundaries. All limits are respected and honored. And there's consistent debriefing after and constant checking in with each other about how is this feeling for you? How does it work for you? What doesn't work? How do we readjust? When those things are in place and there are really strong guardrails around the role play, it can be incredibly liberating. It can be incredibly healing. It can be really arousing to play with different kinds of power in a relationship. There are some people who like to switch between the dominant and submissive role, and there are some who feel more comfortable in either of those roles more exclusively. And again, it's really about finding someone whose kink complements yours and making sure that you're talking about it really effectively.
Mm. That's deep. I like that. And so I have a long way to go on this, but I need you to help me out with this as a father. So I was
Okay.
speaking to someone, and I was having a general conversation with someone, and they were upset with their girlfriend doing something called OnlyFans, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Mhm.
And they were very upset. And they said, well, how would you feel if your girlfriend or even your daughter did an OnlyFans one day? And I said, I would be so upset. And a woman was in the room. She said, you shouldn't, I guess, I don't know the right word. You shouldn't really berate her from exploring her own sexuality and doing what. But I guess help me out. Is that an insecurity for men to not want someone to do something like that, or is it because I think is that bad for someone else's reputation? Am I just thinking of a male's point of view, or please help me? You know?
Well, I think this is a very, very tricky question, and it's fantastic. What I'm hearing is a lot of sort of bumping up against that same double standard that we were talking about before, right? And the shaming that goes along with women being sexual and
Mm,
using their sexuality in any way that feels empowering for them. So it's a very delicate line to walk. And what I would say is that it's a different conversation if it's a partnered context or a parent child context.
right.
But as a parent, I would say, my best offering to you would be to really, think about how you're setting your child up to be relational with sexuality. If they choose to do something like an OnlyFans, or if they chose to be a sex worker, or if they chose to go into the porn industry, how would you help them distinguish what feels right for their body and to understand what their motives are? How would you help equip them with tools to understand the difference between empowerment and empowerment that actually is being exploited for the benefit of others. And there just is no sort of easy way to be able to, just point to something and say, well, if you draw the line here, then it's okay, and over here it's not, because everyone's threshold is different. Um, but I think we run a pretty dangerous line if we start shaming women for doing OnlyFans, because that market exists because there are consumers, right? So if we're going to shame
Right.
women for doing this, we have to also shame the people who are watching it.
Right.
So
Right.
when we stop shaming over here and it becomes okay here, okay, fine, great. Then everybody is aware. There's consent. People aren't getting exploited. They get to set whatever worth they deem is appropriate for the monetization of it. And I think it can be done really in a healthy way. Um, but certainly, if we what's the word I want to use? If we enable that old mentality of women who do this are sluts, or they're broken, or they're tarnished, or they're damaged, we're just engaging in a giant social practice of victim blaming and slut shaming and
Mm.
continuing to bifurcate men can be sexual and women cannot.
That was a beautiful answer. And I, I really needed to hear that. So I really appreciate you. Um, wow. Well, I really love speaking with you. This was eye opening. Those were really genuine questions that I did have, and you really helped me out. One of the things, the last question I really wanted to ask you is, what would you say is kind of, I'm thinking of the right word, but what's the direct correlation between mental health and sexuality? Is there there's something where someone can be more reserved because of something that they went through in their past, or more explorative because maybe they were sheltered in the past? Is there a really strong connection between sexuality and mental health? That's really what I want to know.
Well, first, let me just say you ask awesome questions. So thank you for your questions. They're so great. Um, so direct correlation is sort of dicey language because I don't know what kind of the variables are that we're measuring here, but what I'll say is that every single human being has a relationship to sexuality, even if they are asexual. That's a relationship to sexuality. And because we all are sexual beings, right? Given that we have a relationship to sexuality, even if it's an absence of sex, our sexuality is a part of who we are. And so we can't ignore the Gestalt. For people who don't know that word, it's a German word that means the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So if we compartmentalize and ignore any one domain of our identity, it's going to have a ripple effect in other areas of how we show up in the world. And our mental
Right.
health is another one of those domains. So if we're struggling with mental health issues, it is likely that it will show up in our sexuality, in our work environment, in our capacity as a parent, as a friend, all of those things, all of the other domains are impacted. And the same is true with our sexuality. If we feel a lot of shame there, or if we feel very oppressed in our sexuality, or if we feel very confident and liberated, that's likely going to permeate other domains of our existence as well, because it's all interconnected.
Yeah, man, that's interesting. I really love that.
Oh,
Well, I, I really. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to ask you.
okay.
This is kind of like I guess an awkward thing to end on, but I really wanted to. I'm so curious. What would you suggest to someone who is maybe very sexual here in a relationship, very sexual here and not very sexual here, or wants to explore new sexuality and their partner doesn't? For instance, I'll be very honest and open because I am. So I'll just say, for instance, this happens a lot, right? What if a male wants to try something with a woman, and I think we know what we're talking about, like
There could be so many things.
like what if a male wants to try anal with a woman and the woman is not into it, and you think, well, I really always wanted to try it, maybe I don't, or it could be any one of those things. As you said, I guess it could have been anything, right? But what if what do you do if your partner isn't really like, as explorative as you are?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really challenging position to be in because let's just take a step back for a second and look at a relationship. A relationship is its own system, right? And within that system, it houses two individuals. So you have sort of three separate silos happening at the same time. You've got partner one, partner two, and then the relationship is silo number three. So there's going to be differences between the two silos, right? You guys just aren't
Yeah.
going to be 100% aligned, and thank God, or you get bored to tears.
Right.
So, the differences that come up can sometimes create a lot of vitality in the relationship, but sometimes your needs are competing. And so when people have mismatched arousal patterns or mismatched desire or mismatched libido, it becomes a relationship issue, right? It's not necessarily something's wrong with either of those individuals, but certainly it causes a conflict in the relationship. So I think ways to get around that, get around maybe isn't the right word, but work through that is to really think about what is the meaning that the behavior, for example, in this case, trying anal sex might have for each of the partners. So sometimes it's a question of I'm afraid it might hurt, or I'm afraid people will think of me poorly. I only know that to happen in porn. And so if I do that, does that mean that I'm going to be considered devalued? Because there are, a lot of fears around if I do certain kinds of sexual behaviors, does it mean I'm dirty, slutty, bad, awful, not, kind of wife material that a lot of women
Right.
struggle with? But I think a lot of it is about fear and not knowing how to properly prepare for behaviors like that. And so here's one area where porn can be really dangerous because they don't necessarily highlight all the appropriate ways to help people prepare to be sexual in ways that really minimize any discomfort and maximize pleasure. They just sort of focus on, you know, the heat of
Right.
the moment. So
Right.
a lot of people don't know how to really get their partners in a place of feeling comfortable. So if anal sex is the question that anybody's trying to introduce into a relationship, I suggest you go to bvibe.com. They have this amazing anal training kit that comes with different kinds of anal stimulators, and it comes with kind of a cleansing component and information. They have great information on their website that really normalizes anal sex. Now, that doesn't mean your partner may love it and choose to
Right.
do it, but certainly when I think you stop and say, what does it mean? What does it mean to each of us if we do or don't do this? How will I support my partner in the exploration or experimentation of this? Am I okay with stopping if they start and decide they don't want to? And, create some boundaries around it and really kind of hold empathy for the fact that sexuality carries a lot of weight and meaning for people in ways that most people just aren't even aware.
Right. Mm. Wow, another beautiful answer. I really appreciate you. um, I, I've taken so much of your time today, and I do appreciate it. You are amazing, and as I said, I have so much respect for you, and I was so excited to speak with you today, and just get a lot of. You say my questions are good. It's because I didn't really look at anything to ask you. Those were just general questions that I've had, and so
Mm.
I really
Well, they are
appreciate you.
great. Yeah, no, this was so fun. I appreciate you inviting me on the podcast, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. And where can people find you online?
Yeah, probably the best place is modernintimacy.com. There's a ton of resources there. And for people looking to schedule a consultation, they can also do that there. And then on Instagram and TikTok, I'm at Dr. Kate Balistreri.
I gotta find you on TikTok because I do love TikTok. It's actually bad because I swore I'd never download it, but during quarantine I've gotten bored and I'm addicted. Side note.
Same.
Right.
It's a fun platform.
Exactly. But I feel like I'm too old for those dances. But I do love watching them. I thank you so much. You are the best, and we will talk soon. Yeah.
Sounds great. Take care, Kendall.
You too. Have a great one. Bye bye.
Well, that was a great episode, and I want to thank her so much for being so gracious with her time because she's a busy person. And, please share your support and love for her on Instagram. And if you have any more questions in regards to sex or need any more clarification on some things, please don't ask me, ask her. Uh, and reach out to her. I really felt like I learned a lot from her, which was amazing. And had just a whirlwind of amazing like thoughts and ideas and questions when speaking with her. And I feel like she really gave a lot of clarification to things that as a person, as a man, I really wanted to know. And she really helped me and gave me a lot of nice information, which I loved. I was really excited about this episode, and I was not disappointed. Guys, please follow me on Instagram, share your support, and obviously like, subscribe, share, leave a review to this podcast if you ended up liking it. And when you follow me on Instagram too, DM us or Instagram us or email us, excuse me. And I'm going to be doing something next season, which, whenever I feel like it, but it'll be, what I want to do is I want to try something new. I want to invite people, whether they're random, whether I know them or not. They can even be anonymous, but I want people to join me on a podcast and talk about mental health, and we can vent from here to Timbuktu. We can just talk about about your day, your anxieties, or about anything that you might be going through. I want to um, talk to people, and again, it can be anonymously about mental health and spread mental health awareness. And I think it'd be cool to speak to people, and it could be private or not, and just talk about our day and just have a random conversation about mental health and how it could help people. So that's something that I'm looking into that will be kind of new and unique, and I'm going to look into it more. Um, but yeah, if you want to be a part of that process, let me know. I'll be really interested to speak to you. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please show your support. Under this episode, there will be a link to, if you want to donate to the podcast. It'll help with, if you notice that every single one of my guests has a better audio than I, and it's because, I need more money. So if you want to support the podcast, please do so. Please join me in the effort to spread mental health awareness. Within that, a lot of it is with our climate. I'm a huge climate change supporter. Please do everything you can to look within your district and within your state on what you can do to support climate change. Guys, go out and vote. No politics on this show other than to say vote. And, I'm really excited to see what's next for the podcast. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who joined me on this journey so far. And thank you guys for not berating me on my lisp too much, because, as I said, as I got older, my lisp became worse. I don't know why. But yeah, thank you guys. I'm really honored and happy to share this podcast with you and just open myself up a little bit more and spread mental health awareness and make it a little bit more normalized, especially for men and within the African American community, which is definitely a marginalized group that doesn't get enough support in regards to mental health. So again, Instagram, VentPack Journal. And remember, we vent together. We stand together as a pack. VentPack.